Welcome to Black Men in Justice series. This is our second speaker, David Miller, and Kent Riggs is going to introduce him, and he will present, and then you are welcome. We'll open the floor to questions, and I hope that you will ask him really difficult questions. All right, so let me introduce Kent Riggs.
Hello, my name is Kent. Would like to thank you all for coming out here today. I would also like to thank our speaker, David Miller, for making it out here. Mr. Miller is the Chief Visionary Officer of the Urban Leadership Institute, and he's also the author of Raising Him Alone and Khalil's Way. The former addresses problems that single mothers face in raising adolescent boys, and the latter explores the issues that bullying presents to the development of youth and education. He has worked at the Urban Leadership Institute since 1999 to improve the living situation of disadvantaged youth, such with incarcerated parents or raised in single-parent households. And today he is here to speak to us about systems and how they support or act in the detriment of black males and children. And he's also going to show us how he came to these conclusions. And I'd like to welcome Mr. David Miller.
Thank you, thank you. Slightly nervous. Just a little bit. How y'all doing? Y'all okay? All right. Is the food good? Do y'all usually eat like this during class sessions?
No, they don't usually get food.
Okay. And so let me introduce myself. And really what I want to do is kind of create an environment where we can have an open conversation about black men as it relates to justice, but to just really begin to look at this whole issue of justice, not just related to black men, but also looking at it through the lens of class. And so I think oftentimes when we talk about issues related to justice, it's real difficult to have an honest conversation. And so Dr. Johnson sent me a whole bunch of notes because she knows I can talk, and so I want to try to stick to the format that she has laid out. And so my name is David Miller, born and raised in Baltimore. How much do you guys know about Baltimore?
Welcome.
Said nothing.
The Wire.
All right, how many of y'all have seen The Wire? Just by show of hands.
The what?
Okay, The Wire, the HBO miniseries The Wire. So for those of you who have seen the HBO miniseries The Wire, that's the neighborhood. Those are the neighborhoods that I grew up in. And so that was sort of my early life. Most of the people in my neighborhood sold drugs. Most of the young men in my cohort ended up going to prison. I decided to go to college. And so, you know, this whole notion of growing up in an urban landscape is something that I often think people don't necessarily really understand if you haven't necessarily grown up in an urban community. And so born and raised in Baltimore, I think that one of the major things that kind of happened to me in my cohort growing up is I was a teenager during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic. And so if you ever go back and look at data related to homicides and incarceration, particularly around, say, 1984, starting in around 1984 when crack cocaine hit, you know, I was literally a teenager. I graduated from high school in 1986. The year that I graduated from high school, we had the most murders in the city that I'm from, which is Baltimore, which is still a relatively small metropolitan city. Now Baltimore probably does about a little less than about 300 murders a year. When I was a teenager, we were doing close to 400 murders a year. And so when I was a 16, 17-year-old, I didn't think that I would live to be 21 years old. I mean, I can still remember sitting on my mother's front porch with my cohort of friends, you know, just having this discussion. You know, if you live to graduation, get out of here. I mean, that was the kind of conversation that I was having while a lot of kids in other communities were talking about applying for schools and doing a whole bunch of other things. Our number one goal was to live through graduation, because the homicide rates, not just in Baltimore, but in almost every major metropolitan city, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, many of the cities that you guys come from, the homicide rates were literally off the charts. And so when you go back and look at that data, particularly around homicides and non-fatal injuries, shootings and stabbings, you see that during the introduction of crack cocaine, in the United States. It was probably the most violent period of American history. And so when I was 17 years old, I think it was my first sort of major encounter with the police. I was arrested at 17 for riding in a stolen car. Of course, I was innocent. I didn't steal a car. I mean, everybody says that, but literally, I didn't steal a car. And so I got in the car with a friend of mine. This is what I told my mother. I knew the car was stolen because when I looked in the car, he was, there was a screwdriver in the ignition, and so I realized that the car. Because who drives a car with a screwdriver? And so I realized the car was stolen. So I got arrested at 17, and that was kind of the first time that I kind of really understood this whole notion of what it means to have handcuffs on, and what it means to even just spend, a couple of hours in a jail cell. When I was 18 years old, I graduated. I ended up going to Morgan State University, a historically black college in Baltimore. One of my good friends had won a scholarship to go to Morehouse in Atlanta, and the goal was you got the scholarship to get out of Baltimore to go to Atlanta, leave, and don't come back. And so my good friend went to Atlanta. He completed his first year at Morehouse. He decided to come back home, and we decided to throw a party to celebrate that at least we had finished our first year of college. We were standing in front of a nightclub. 3 young men tried to rob us. Because we didn't have the money, they started shooting. My best friend was shot in the back with a sawed-off shotgun. He died in my arms. I was 18 years old. And so at 18, I had already witnessed what would be considered a major trauma. I grew up in a 2-parent household. I wasn't a Crip or Blood or gangster disciple. I wasn't a gang member. I was a young man in college, but just happened to be in front of this nightclub on this night in August, and the guys, well, for whatever reason, we didn't have what they wanted. They started shooting, and so they actually shot my man in the back. He literally died in my arms. And when I say that whole incident literally changed my life. And so 3 weeks after my best friend was literally shot and killed in front of me, some guys came to my mother's house, and they said, we know who the shooter was. And so how honest can I be with them?
Completely.
Okay, so the guys came to my mother's house. Keep in mind, I'm a college student. I'm not a dope boy. I'm not a gang member. But I had already witnessed a major trauma. So these guys came to my mother's house, and they knocked on the door, and they said, we know who the shooter is. And they, I drunk a 40, back then we used to drink OE. Y'all too young, y'all know what I'm talking about. She laughing, she know what I'm talking about. She almost choked on her food. Drunk a 40 OE, smoked some weed, got in the car. In the back seat, there were 2 9mm handguns. The dude who was driving the car said, basically, here's the deal. We're going to go to this dude's house, and you're going to get out the car, you're going to knock on the door, and when whoever opens the door, you're going to start shooting. And you're going to start, and I'm not using the exact language that he used. He basically said to me, because they killed one of ours and you were there, when you get out the car and knock on the door, you need to shoot anybody that moves. Mom, dad, grandma, goldfish, you name it. As soon as you knock on the door, anybody who steps up, you shoot them. And so, again, I'm an 18-year-old college student. I'm already traumatized. I'm already, out of my mind. And I'd already decided I ain't even going back to college. The hell with college, right? Because they killed my man. And so at the time, I don't think my parents could even understand the magnitude of the trauma that I had witnessed. And so literally, knocked on this boy's door 2 weeks after we buried my best friend. My man is in the car, I got the gun, I knock on the door, and his mother comes to the door. I put the gun in his mother's face. As I start to pull the trigger, I said, look, I'm here to see your son. And the young man's name was Terrence. And I said, I'm here to see Terrence. And to my surprise, she went to go get the young man. Young man comes to the porch, I put the gun in his face, and as I start to blow this boy's brains out, I started to cry because my parents didn't raise a killer. And I share that story with people because even though I'm college educated, undergraduate degree, master's degree, I've traveled all over the world. I was just in West Africa 5 weeks ago. I'm always going to be a product of my environment. right? Because those are some of the kinds of things that happened to me growing up, and I kind of share that with folks because I really want you guys to understand that Dr. Johnson and the faculty and staff here is really trying to prepare y'all for the real world of work, particularly if you're going to be doing work in criminal justice field. What ends up happening, y'all, is most people who come out of undergrad and graduate school are ill prepared to legitimately go in the workforce and do the kind of work that needs to be done. And I think a lot of that is because oftentimes the coursework is very narrow. The books that most professors, not Dr. Johnson, but even the literature and the reading material that you would read in most graduate or undergraduate courses doesn't necessarily speak to the real issues of folks that you're going to be dealing with when you go out into the work world. And so I've done everything from taught public school to taught graduate school at Johns Hopkins University and the School of Education. I've done a lot of work at for about 6 years. I was assigned to Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health under the Violence Prevention Division, working through a grant through the Center for Disease Control, looking at school-based violence. I've worked with every recognized gang in the United States, you name them, MS-13, Crips, Bloods, Gangster Disciples, folks, you name it. I've been to every, what you would consider ghetto in this country, working with young men, particularly young men of color around, how do we get these young men to look at their lives differently? And how do we begin to help them understand that their lives have meaning and value? And so I put together just a couple of slides. I don't know if you can turn the lights down.
Yes.
Would you close that, those lines?
And so I put together just a couple of images because I know we live in a very visual society, and I really just wanted to create just a couple of images to show you, just to begin to get you guys thinking about the kinds of questions that you want to ask me. I mean, I could talk to y'all for 8 hours, right? But I'm really interested in having you guys ask me questions. So go to the next slide. And so, I mean, most people are familiar with the data. We incarcerate more people in this country than anybody else in the world, right? We are the land of the free, the home of the brave, and all that good stuff. Yet we over-incarcerate, right? I don't know how many of you have ever been to a prison or jail, but it is a very, it's painful. I mean, it's to the point now where it is very emotionally, it is difficult for me to even walk into a prison now, because you see so many young men. I mean, it is, when I say it's an emotional experience, a couple of years ago I was at a jail in Maryland called Hagerstown, and I was standing out in front of the warden's office, and when I just looked across the courtyard, you could see 1,500 predominantly black and brown young men in jumpsuits. But then when you sit down and you start talking to these young men, and you find out, well, this brother was in graduate school, right? And he couldn't pay his tuition, so he got out there and he started selling weed. He got popped, next thing you know, he in jail. Many of my friends was in college when they got arrested. And so, a lot of times I think the lens that we tend to use when we talk about men who are incarcerated, a lot of times we think that these men don't necessarily have the kind of educational background or the kind of skills to make it in the general society, and that's often not the case. And so these statistics really don't kind of give people sort of a broader understanding of this issue of incarceration. Most of the time you only see statistics that just talk about just the sheer number of men that are in jail, right, that are locked up. But you guys would be surprised at the number of people who have some kind of relationship with the criminal justice system. Home monitor, home detention, ankle bracelet. I mean, when you out walking, you'll see young men and young ladies with anybody here in the box? Anybody ain't got an ankle bracelet on? 2 of y'all? Okay, you don't have to share with me. Wants to let you know. And so, when you look at this whole issue of the impact of mass incarceration, just an overwhelming number of people have some level, some connection to the criminal justice system. 3 of my good friends. One of my good friends is a tenured professor at a very esteemed university, which I won't name, but he has a criminal record. And so don't ever think that just because you see men and women in your community who are doing well, they have not been dramatically impacted by the criminal justice system. And so the statistics I mean, there are a whole bunch of different sets of statistics that you could look at. One of the most frustrating for me is when you begin to look at the community toll that incarceration has. The vast majority of men that I've ever worked with in prison have children. What happens to those children? What happens to those children who have a dad or a mom that's in prison? Even though I know we're talking about, you know, black men or men of color, I think oftentimes we also discount the impact of incarceration on women. Black and Latino females 18 to 35 represent the fastest growing prison population in America. And so the rates of men going to prison have pretty much remained steady. But when you look at what's happening to girls and women that are going to prison, one of the logical questions that we really got to ask ourselves is really what's happening to family. Some of us in this room, if we went around the room, I'm sure some of us in this room grew up with at least one or more parents in prison. I was at a jail about a year ago and met a father and son locked up on the same unit. So they literally locked up on the same, they're literally on the same unit. And they see each other every day. I mean, they literally walking to the courtyard, going, back and forth throughout the prison system. They see each other. So you can go to the next slide. One of the books that I would strongly suggest you read is a book called The New Jim Crow. And I don't know if it was on your reading list, but there's a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Again, probably one of the more definitive works that has been done in the last couple of years, which really looks at this whole issue of mass incarceration. And so, I mean, again, if you're really trying to look at a lot of the data and look at a lot of the policies, Michelle Alexander's book is really good. And what I'm probably going to do is share a couple of other books with you, because I think it's important for you to begin to read outside of what the professors give you. All right, because there's no way that they can give you everything that you probably need to read. Have any of you read Code of the Streets? I don't know if that's on your suggested reading list for any of you. Code of the Streets by Dr. Elijah Anderson. He's at Yale.
Yeah, I read that as an article in sociology class.
Okay, another good book, Code of the Streets. He replicated Du Bois's Philadelphia Negro Experiment. We took a whole bunch of graduate students and they just really literally combed the streets of Philadelphia, interviewing moms and dads and men and women coming home from prison and people standing on the corner to try to figure out, what is it going to take to address many of these social challenges in communities. So you can go to the next slide. Well, one minute, before you go back, one of the reasons why I also show this slide to people is because I don't think people really understand that prisons are a business. You can buy stock in prison. One of the leading companies that have started this whole notion around privatization of prisons is a group called Correctional Corporation of America. And so if you did a Google search or whatever search engine you go to, if you looked up Correctional Corporation of America, you would be blown away that you can buy stock in prison. And they manage a number of both, they manage a number of prisons and jails across this country. Wackenut Security, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Wackenut Security. They historically have provided security guards in places like, Dwayne Reed, CVS's, little department stores. But now they've also gotten into the game of the privatization of prisons. And so anything connected to prison makes money. From everything in prison is outsourced. When I used to teach school in prison, I wasn't hired by the prison. I was hired through a separate entity that the prison actually paid. Food service. All of the things that are connected with a prison or jail are paid, are things that are being paid for. And so what you find in prison is a lot of money is being made. Phone calls. I mean, there have been a number of articles written over the last couple of years, the alarming telephone bills that one would get from having a loved one call home who's incarcerated. And so this whole idea around prisons are a business. And in order to generate fuel for that business, you got to have bodies, right? And so don't ever think that this whole issue around justice and money are not connected or linked, because when you begin to look at the stocks, when you begin to do your research, you see that there are even more organizations that are interested in the privatization of prisons. You can go to the next slide. And a lot of this is just food for thought. You know, this is a quote by Frederick Douglass, and I just really one of the reasons why I put this quote up here is because this conversation around justice a lot of times, y'all, is really difficult for us to have. I mean, in order to really have an honest conversation about justice, we got to look at issues around mass incarceration. We got to look at issues related to what happens when a first-time offender who's African American and a first-time offender who was white get locked up for the same crime. The data suggests, and most of the reports that you will find suggest that the young white male may be offered what's called a community-based sanction, some kind of community-based program. Statistically, more often than not, the African American male first-time offender is going to prison or jail. And see, and these are not things that I'm just making up. When you really begin to look at a lot of the research that's been done by the Sentencing Project in Washington, D.C., Justice Policy Institute, I mean, you really see some discrepancies between what happens to both men, particularly men of color in the system. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to give you guys 2 case studies to really kind of bring this thing home when we talk about justice. And I decided to select 2 guys that I have a really good relationship with because I have really intimate knowledge about their background. Walter Lomax served 39 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. I'm going to say that again. Walter Lomax spent 39 years in prison. I've only been on the planet 44 years, right? This brother spent 39 years in jail for a crime that he did not commit. And the only reason that he was able to get out of jail is because there were a couple of groups, national groups, that heard about his case and decided to take on his case pro bono and really began to look at the evidence by the witnesses and really kind of look at the whole thing. Brother Lomax was accused of killing a man in a store. Now the interesting thing was Lomax had a cast. He had a cast. 2 days before the shooting, he had a cast on his hand. And so in the witness testimony, they never mentioned that the shooter had a cast on. I mean, he had a big old cast on his hand, right? So he couldn't have fired the gun. They said the guy had the gun in his right hand, and this is what the witness said, and he killed the man. But Walter Lomax had a cast on his right hand, and that evidence was never introduced in his case. So he spent 39 years in a box, right? I see Walter a lot. He actually shares. I allow him to use some office space. I'm with him on a regular basis. And the challenges that he had over those 39 years, y'all, just around this whole notion of justice. 39 years in prison for a crime that he didn't commit. And so, now go down one more. And so what Walter decided to do is to really begin to look at how can he be an advocate. So he started a nonprofit. He has received funding through the Open Society Foundation. And now a lot of his work is around advocating for men who are currently incarcerated and men who are going to be coming home. And so this is an example of, you know, a guy who came out of prison, wasn't bitter, and decided to be an advocate. And one of the things that I think is often missing from the discussion when we talk about incarceration is there are so many men and women that are coming home from prison that are doing tremendous work in communities. But A, they don't necessarily get the support that they need, and B, they still carry the stigma of coming home from prison. You can go to the next one. Michael Austin. Michael Austin served 27 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Where's the justice, y'all? Michael Austin is like 6'5", dark skinned, you know, tall, you know, brother. The guy they said who was the shooter was like 5'9" and light skinned. Stevie Wonder could see that something ain't right here, y'all. The shooter was supposed to be 5'9" and light skinned. Michael Austin is 6'4", 6'5", dark skinned. Right? Has the build and the frame of a basketball player. But yet they still convicted him. They still sentenced him to 27 years in prison. One is because he didn't have the money to get the kind of lawyer that many people can get. And so you guys would just be blown away how many people are falsely imprisoned on a regular basis. But you never hear about it. Unless you see a news expose on 60 Minutes, or unless you see a story on the nightly news, many people think that everybody who's in prison actually committed the crime. I mean, that is so far from the truth. So I wanted to share just two examples of people that I have a great relationship with, you know, just intimate knowledge of the challenges that they went through. Michael Austin is a jazz musician, and so he cut his first jazz CD, you know, a couple weeks ago, and so I wanted to share his story with you because, again, y'all, we got to really be clear on this whole idea around justice. You go to the next slide. Okay, so this was a story that happened. This was an incident that happened in New York City. There was a guy who was supposed to be a serial killer, robbing and killing merchants. If you look to my far left, that is the composite description of the person who they thought was a serial killer. African American man, close cut haircut, with sunglasses. This cat right here is the person that was out there. This was the serial killer. White, deranged looking dude, you know, who was actually the one who did the crime. But this was the composite, so they were looking for this guy to the far right. And so again, you know, this issue of perceptions, is something that I think, particularly as you guys go through your coursework and you're doing your internships, and we got to be real clear about the landscape that we're operating under. You know, one of the things for me that's very frustrating that I'm going to talk about in a minute is, you know, I'm an educated African American man, married, 3 children. I did everything society told me to do, but it is amazing how there are times when I may be in an office building and I might just get on the elevator with some sweatpants on and a baseball hat. I have had white people get off the elevator because the perception is that I'm up to something, that I look sneaky, or that I might do something. And so these images that we are bombarded with on a regular basis, particularly that come out of Hollywood, a lot of the movies, a lot of these reality shows. I mean, again, you know, we have created a society. We've created a society where the vast majority of people in society are, to some degree, afraid of black men. All right? And so I want you to just think about that as we move forward really quickly, because I definitely want to jump to some questions. And this is a piece by how many of y'all know who Meek Mill is? Philadelphia-based rapper. I mean, I do a lot of work around kind of decoding a lot of the messages and the images that I see in the hip hop industry or rap music industry. Because while I would never say that the music is solely responsible for some of the challenges that we're faced with, the music is definitely a co-conspirator. Definitely, and I just had a chance to. I mean, you guys are pretty young. Do y'all know who Public Enemy is? Yeah. Okay, all right. And so I was just with Janice, your boys, from Public Enemy last week, and we were having this conversation around how do we begin to get the music industry to be more socially responsible about the lyrics and about the images. Because when I grew up, the music was totally different. Hip-hop was totally different. And now I think we're in a space where you just see so much glorification of the violence, going to prison. I mean, you listen to some of these little rappers talking about going to prison, like going to prison to summer camp. And what ends up happening is so many younger males in the community begin to think that, you know, if I got to go away for 8 to 10 years, when I come back home, I'm going to have street credibility. To the point where I know young men who have actually gone to prison, actually served time in prison, for crimes that they didn't commit, because they thought if they said I wasn't the shooter, it was really this guy right here was a shooter, then you labeled as a snitch in the community, and you instantly lose street credibility. And so that's the insanity of this prison culture. When I was 17, 18 years old, there was a clear delineation between life in the street and life in prison. And what I have seen now is street culture or urban life and prison culture have now merged. And so a lot of the stuff that you see people doing in prison, now they're doing in the streets, even if they haven't been in prison. So it's created a very interesting dynamic. You can go to the next slide. Go to the next slide, and we're going to come back to that. And so again, these images, you know, in terms of, you know, best practices and some of the work that I do, a lot of the work that I do is really around challenging notions of what does it mean to be a man. You know, what does the term masculine mean? Because in a lot of the work that I do with a lot of the little boys, they believe being a member of the Crips or Bloods at 13 or 14 years old, you know, or 9 or 10, they believe that that is a rites of passage to manhood. And so I've met boys 6 and 7 years old who are gang members because their parents were gang members or they lived in gang-infested communities. And so this whole notion of what does it mean to be a man? And unless we begin to really challenge these notions about manhood and masculinity, we will continue to see young men going to prison because they believe it's a badge of honor. Next slide real quick, and I know y'all love this dude. Man, Rick Ross. Now, the interesting thing about Rick Ross, just really quickly to give you guys just a really basic understanding of how powerful the media is. How much do y'all know about Rick Ross?
He was a correction officer.
He was a correctional officer. What else you know about him? I don't know why he always take his shirt off, but that's a whole nother discussion. What else do you know about him?
He's a college graduate, I think.
No, he's not a college graduate.
He went to school.
He went to school. What else do you know about him?
He took his name from a real life criminal.
All right, here's what I don't think we understand. Rick Ross is not his real name. He basically borrowed the name Rick Ross from a guy by the name of Freeway Rick Ross, who was next to a guy at DC named Rayful Edmonds. Rick Ross was considered to be the largest drug kingpin that has ever been arrested and prosecuted in the U.S. And so this little dude right here decided, if I take this guy's name since he away in prison, and I start rapping about all of this stuff that I'm doing, then I'm going to be able to make money and I'm going to sell records. So Rick Ross is not even his real name. And the reason why I share this with people is because we got to begin to understand the images. These images that y'all see, while you might turn it on and think it's not a big deal, these images, Rick Ross, Lil Wayne, Nicki Minaj, this dude 2 Chainz, because I definitely think something is seriously wrong with him. I mean, like, he need a mentor, he need to be on medication. I mean, and while we laugh about it, you got young men who listen to this foolishness. They listen to it. And because most of the young men that I work with and have worked with over the last 20 years are part of what I call the Absent Daddy Club. They mad. They young men who were mad as hell because they didn't grow up with a sober, responsible, spiritually guided father. And so, you know, if you grow up in a community, you don't necessarily have a good relationship with your dad, you don't have a lot of strong relationships with male figures, you're going to look to that corner. You're going to look to that video. And I think that's what's beginning to happen, you know, with so many of our young men. I'm going to tell y'all a quick story, and then I'm going to share a couple other things, and I really want to take questions. So about 2 years ago, I did a project at the Baltimore City Jail, right? And it's interesting, I did the project to get closer to my cousin. I mean, you know, because my cousin was locked up there at the time. I didn't really get to see my cousin as much as I would like to. My first cousin, we did everything together. So I said, fine, I'm going to go down there and do this project at the jail. That way I can spend some more time with my cousin. Did a project where we had about 30 young men, ages, say, 18 to like 70, right? One of the other things that I don't think that people realize is you got guys in jail 70, 75 years old, in wheelchairs, terminal cancer. I mean, you'd be blown away. I mean, you'll see guys old enough to be like your great-great-great-grandfather that are in jail, 70, 75 years of age, right? And then you have an increasing population of younger boys, and well, they're actually boys, 13, 14 years old in maximum security prisons. Last year we did a project in Philadelphia with the Philadelphia Department of Corrections where we did a writing project with 25 boys ages 13 to 17 who are locked up in a maximum security facility from everything from carjacking to rape to murder to attempted murder, and they stay in an isolated unit until they're 17, and then they take them out of the isolated unit, and then they just release these boys into the general population. So you can be 14 years old in a maximum security prison or jail. And so at the jail, I mean, we got young guys, and we got like really old guys. And so we did this activity, and we had a number of volunteers help us. We did an activity where we asked